All right, guys. So last night we had an absolutely horrifying plane crash that took place not too far from me here in Washington, D.C., where essentially you had a commercial plane that was coming apparently from Wichita, Kansas, and it was making its descent into the D.C. airport. And at the same time, you had a military Black Hawk helicopter that crossed into its path, crashed into it, and then the plane ended up in the Potomac River. Now, unfortunately, according here to the latest from CNN, there were no survivors from this. So, as far as what I've seen, this may be the single deadliest airline incident in modern U.S. history in like over 20 years at this point. So, absolutely terrible, absolutely tragic. And we're going to have to get to more here on Trump's response to this entire situation because it's as pathetic as you could possibly imagine that it would be. So, here we have a video of the actual incident. You can see here in the bottom right hand corner of your screen. It's a little bit small there, but they're going to zoom in here in a second, where you can see the helicopter coming in here from the right, the plane making its descent to the airport, crossing the river there, and then it makes contact with it. Now, again, there's going to be investigations into how exactly this kind of a thing happens. To me, on initial look, obviously you look at that kind of a video and it seems like the helicopter just flew directly into the plane. But keep in mind, it's nighttime. It's very dark. There are lights around the city that make it hard to see, a helicopter's lights versus a plane lights versus a city lights. There are a whole bunch of different factors that are coming into play in this kind of an incident. Potential issues with communication. Apparently, there's some reporting that there was another plane that was taking off on a similar trajectory as this plane was coming down. So maybe the helicopter pilots were looking at the departing plane versus the arriving plane. There's a whole bunch of different potential explanations as to how this specific incident happened. We're going to get to Trump's response and what he blames, which is predictably DEI here, in a second. But, again, absolutely terrifying that this kind of a thing could even potentially happen. I don't know why you would have military sort of training flights, I guess is what it was, flying in one of the busiest airspaces in the entirety of the United States. But this is what happened. So we also have a picture here of the aftermath of the wreckage as we had some of these rescue boats going out and trying to search for people in the water last night. So you can see the plane looks like it's pretty mangled up there. And again, there were no survivors to this. And as a result of that, we have tragic stories like this guy who was speaking to the local news, WUSA 9, and said that he was texting his wife as she was apparently coming in. And then the texts abruptly stopped, and then they wouldn't go through. And let's just go ahead and listen to this guy real quick.
I'm just praying that somebody's pulling her out of the river right now as we speak. That's all I can pray for. I'm just praying to God.
When was the last time you spoke with her?
She texted me that they were landing in 20 minutes.
Can you show us a text message that you got from her?
Landing in 20 minutes. The rest of my text did not get delivered. That's when I realized something might be up.
Just absolutely terrible. And obviously you feel for this guy and everybody else who lost somebody in this crash. Apparently there were a number of children on board. There were some people who were coming back from a figure skating sort of event that was happening in Wichita, Kansas, which is apparently where this flight was coming from to DC. Terrible, terrible shit. So with that being said, in terms of the background and the facts of what happened, let's go ahead and check in with our current president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, who decided to use this as an opportunity to blame DEI, diversity, on this crash. Let's go ahead and jump into this here.
You can't have regular people doing that job. They won't be able to do it. But we'll restore faith in American air travel. I'll have more to say about that. I do want to point out that various articles that appeared prior to my entering office, and here's one. The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they want them. They can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so. This was in January 14th, so that was a week before I entered office, they put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program. Then another article, the Federal Aviation Administration, this was before I got to office, recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine? These are people that are, I mean, actually, their lives are shortened because of the stress that they have. Brilliant people have to be in those positions, and their lives are actually shortened, very substantially shortened because of the stress, where you have many, many planes coming into one target, and you need a very special talent and a very special genius to be able to do it. Targeted disabilities are those disabilities that the federal government, as a matter of policy, has identified for special emphasis in recruitment and hiring. The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan. Think of that. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says...
Okay, so that's about enough of that. To give you guys just a clear picture on what exactly Trump is talking about here, because keep in mind, we've had other examples like this as well. We also saw conservatives when the Baltimore Bridge collapse happened, for example, instead of addressing systemic issues with American infrastructure, a lack of funding, a lack of advancement in that front, they blame the fact that the Baltimore mayor happens to be black, and they called him the DEI mayor. They blame DEI for basically every single tragedy or systemic issue or anything that happens. Their knee-jerk reaction is to say it must be because of diversity, equity, and inclusion that this kind of a thing happened, right? Again, not the fault of corporate elites, not the fault of privatization, not the fault of a lack of funding, not the fault of systemic issues or a lack of regulation. It's the fault of DEI. Now, what that should tell you just up front is, like, number one, these people have absolutely no interest whatsoever in addressing the underlying systemic flaws in something like the FAA or the TSA or broadly the airline industry here in the United States that we've covered on this channel extensively, whether it comes to like the flaws of Boeing as a major U.S. manufacturer here in this country and a defense contractor as well, and their proclivity to assassinate or to get rid of whistleblowers whenever they speak out about some of the flaws of that kind of a company. They never discuss these systemic issues, right? It tells you that they have no interest in actually addressing those things. They're using DEI as a measure of deflection to not actually have to talk about confronting corporate power, about confronting a lack of safety regulations, or whatever the case may be. That's what it should immediately tell you whenever somebody's response to this kind of a tragedy or a crisis is to blame DEI. As if, what Trump was sort of hinting at there, that the FAA is hiring completely unqualified disabled people to run air traffic control in this country. So again, a little bit more background on that. They say here that targeted disabilities are generally manifest as deafness, blindness, significant mobility impairments, or intellectual disabilities. They say that the implication that this policy is new or that it stems from efforts that began under U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and President Biden was demonstrably false. They say that the FAA said in a statement to Fox News for the 2024 article that this is talking about, that the FAA employs tens of thousands of people for a wide range of positions, from administrative roles to oversight and execution of critical safety functions. Like many large employers, the agency proactively seeks qualified candidates from as many sources as possible, all of whom must meet rigorous qualifications that, of course, will vary by position. They say additionally, during Trump's first term, the FAA launched a pilot program in 2019 to enroll up to 20 people with disabilities in training for careers in air traffic operations. They said, quote, at the time, under the Trump administration, the candidates in this program will receive the same rigorous consideration in terms of aptitude, medical, and security qualifications as those individuals considered for a standard public opening for air traffic controller jobs. So, in other words, if you look at the Trump administration 1.0 back from 2019 and his FAA, they were deploying the same exact quote-unquote DEI program where you're not ignoring qualifications. You're not ignoring aptitude. You're not ignoring somebody's capability to do the job that they are being hired for. You're just also taking into consideration other factors as well, right? Trump's own administration back in 2019 had these same exact standards, and they made this argument. Now, fast forward to today, even though it's essentially the same exact policy, now he's saying this policy is to blame because we somehow had, like, I guess in his view, like if you look at the actual standards that we're talking about here, and keep in mind, again, the FAA is a massive organization. So you have jobs from the air traffic controller to other administrative positions to every single thing down the chain where you could potentially be looking to expand your horizons and hire people who have various different disabilities, right? But at the same time, you're saying we're still only going to hire people for any given position if they meet the qualifications for that position. Trump's implication is that they're hiring, I guess, like deaf and blind multiple amputees to be air traffic controllers, or people with like major psychiatric issues to be air traffic controllers. That's not what's happening. That is not what's happening. This is made up deflection bullshit because he does not want to actually address the underlying systemic issues, right? So again, I mean, just a little bit of background there in terms of what we're actually talking about. Now, we also had a response here from Mayor Pete himself, who I guess is, according to the latest news, supposedly going to be trying to make a run for the Michigan Senate seat. And he responded to Trump here. He said, despicable. As families grieve, Trump should be leading, not lying. We put safety first, drove down close calls, which are happening all the time, by the way. They grew air traffic control and had zero commercial airline crash fatalities out of millions of flights on our watch. President Trump now oversees the military and the FAA. One of his first acts was to fire and suspend some of the key personnel who helped to keep our skies safe. Time for the president to show actual leadership and explain what he will do to prevent this from happening again. Now, in terms of the point that I highlighted here, he's 100% correct. And we'll get to more of that here in a second in terms of the Trump administration's push to gut key federal agencies that could potentially, keep, this kind of a thing from happening in the future. Now, to double down on all of this, there was a Q&A portion of Trump's press event that we just watched where he was confronted on his claim here that diversity had something to do with this crash. Keep in mind, we still don't even know who the air traffic controller or control people were who were responsible for this specific event. We don't even know that, right? They could be a straight white male. They could be any other assortment of various people. Trump's knee-jerk reaction was to say, this must be because we're hiring unqualified people with psychiatric and physical ailments that prevent them from doing the job. It's completely made up. But he was pressed on this. Let's see his response of him doubling down on this anti-DEI push.
Today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. You then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We want brilliant people doing this. This is a major chess game.
Okay, so he's directly confronted on this after he himself admitted we don't really know what happened here, right? We don't know who the air traffic control personnel were. We don't know if this was the fault of the people flying the military helicopter or the people flying the commercial plane or the air traffic control. We don't know what really happened here, but I'm still going to blame DEI. Huh? What does that mean? How does that make any sense? It doesn't make any sense. Of course it doesn't. I mean, again, how can you come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash? And he just says, common sense. There must be some minority that I can pick out to blame for this situation, right? Now, we continue. We also had another question here where he was confronted on what I was just pointing out in this article, where this was essentially the same policy that was under his first administration that he did nothing about. Let's see how he responds to that dynamic there.
The cited FAA text that you read is real, but the implication that this policy is new or that it stems from efforts that began under President Biden or the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is demonstrably false. It's been on the FAA's website.
That, you?
No, it's on the website, the FAA's website. It was there in 2013. It was there for the entirety.
What I read.
It was there for the entirety of your administration too. So my question is, why didn't you change the policy during your first administration?
I did change it. I changed the Obama policy. And we had a very good policy. And then Biden came in and he changed it. And then when I came in 3 days ago, I signed a new order bringing it to the highest level of intelligence. Okay.
It was on the website.
Okay. I mean, what are we supposed to say to this, guys? There's no response there. Oh, I changed it. Okay, but you verifiably didn't. And this policy was on the books since what, 2013. So what are we talking about here, guys? He can just sort of make shit up on the fly and just kind of get away with it. Right? No, even though you have verifiable proof that I did not change this policy and it was intact under my administration, I'm going to say that it wasn't and that I changed it and it was perfect. And then Biden came in and then it was terrible. And then I came back in and now it's perfect again. Okay, I guess. Fuck, man. Now, we also have some of Trump's biggest boot stuffing down their throat bootlickers here with Andy Ogles, representative, who doubled down on his anti-DEI, DEI is to blame for everything. I stub my toe in the morning and I'm blaming black people or whatever sort of take here. So let's go ahead and jump into this video here with him with, I believe this is Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business.
Is there any reason to believe there was any foul play here?
Well, at this time, you hate to jump to any conclusions. Obviously, we'll look at everything, check all the boxes. I had just taken off from D.C. Before the crash, and of course, it came across my cell phone, and I saw it and was horrified. So prayers go out to all those impacted. But, to your point, I think you have to look at this with eyes wide open, see what happened. Human error, was it some sort of equipment failure? Did DEI play a role in this type of thing? So
you had me in the first half, right? Was it an equipment failure where they failed to notify the pilots that something was in their path? Was it some sort of a human error? Or maybe it was just DEI. I don't know. Maybe DEI, because that's what we're going to use to explain away every single systemic failure in this country, I guess. Now, the reason that I call this guy such a bootlicker for Trump and MAGA is that this is the same guy, I believe, who recently introduced a bill to essentially allow Trump to run for a third term. Right? So this is who this guy, Representative Andy Ogles, is. I think he's found his lane here. Now, in terms of these systemic issues, right? Because I've been referencing that a lot throughout this video. What are we actually talking about here? Well, a few things here. Number one, as Matt Stoller points out here, part of the cause, he says the cause was likely. I don't know if this was directly the cause, but it could be, of this crash, was that Ted Cruz and others who voted for this bill pushed to add 5 slots to an already busy airport in some of the most overcrowded airspace in the world, despite warnings of safety officials, so that he could have a more convenient flight home. So what he's referring to here is that I believe last year, Congress passed a bill where they included increasing the amount of flights that are going into the DCA airport, right? And essentially the reason for this, if you live in DC, you might understand this. If you don't, you might not. But there's the DC airport, there's BWI that's in Baltimore, and then there's the Dulles airport that's like, 45 minutes, an hour outside of DC. Now, the reason why they wanted to increase the amount of flights going into an incredibly overcrowded, busy airport like DCA is because we have a lot of politicians who live around in various places around the country who want to be able to more easily fly into DC so that they can go to Congress, they can go to the White House, they can go wherever they want to go, right? So essentially they made it less safe as an airport in general in order to make it more convenient for them to fly into DC. So that's sort of what Matt Stoller is referring to there. And the interesting part of this is that, yeah, you had guys like Ted Cruz and other politicians from like California and other places around the country who supported this bill, but specifically you had Virginia and Maryland officials, senators, who stood up in protest of this bill because they recognized, living in this area, that this was an incredibly dangerous move. And yet they still went ahead and did it because they didn't want to have to drive 45 minutes an hour from Dulles Airport, right? So that's one aspect in terms of a potential cause. We don't know exactly, again, what the immediate factors were that caused this. But again, in terms of the broader structural or systemic issues that are going on here, we also had this report here from Lever News. Shout out to them. They do great work. And their headline here was, Trump gives airlines their deregulator. So this is Trump's Department of Transportation nominee. Okay. His name is Sean Duffy, and he is a former representative turned airline industry lobbyist, as well as a reality TV star, because of course he is, right? This is the Trump administration we're talking about here. But he's a former representative turned airline industry lobbyist. And this is who Trump picked to lead his Department of Transportation. I wonder if this guy is going to push forward with increasing the amount of air traffic controllers and making sure that they're paid adequately and they have adequate safety regulations that are put in place, and we're going to go after the airlines that are cutting corners and whatever the case may be. I'm sure he's going to do that, right? Being a former airline lobbyist. This is Trump's entire administration in a nutshell here. His entire administration is filled with billionaires, with donors, with lobbyists, with Wall Street ghouls. This is what his administration represents, okay? They represent the wealthy at the expense of everybody else. So this is, again, part of the core reason why Trump is out there blaming DEI and disabled people for this kind of a crash instead of corporations or a lack of funding or a lack of regulations or a lack of air traffic controllers or whatever the case may be. He's not looking at these systemic factors because he wants people like this to be in key positions like this in order to deflect away from all of those structural issues. To be in this position to say, maybe we hired too many disabled people, maybe we hired too many black people, too many Latinos, whatever the case may be. It's all a fucking distraction. And if you believe this distraction, I'm sorry, you're just fucking stupid at this point. You're stupid or you're gullible. It's the most classic right-wing playbook in history. Let's blame minorities. Let's blame immigrants. Let's blame Muslims. Let's blame disabled people. Let's blame trans people or LGBTQ people broadly instead of blaming the elites, which is who is to blame in situations like this. But this is Trump's administration here. Now, we also had this gem here, Sean Duffy, who was asked a few questions at one of these events that he showed up to. I believe this is the DC mayor here, Muriel Bowser, who he's next to here. He had, sort of the bravery to come out with this bold statement here that obviously it is not standard to have aircraft collide. I want to be clear on that. Let me say it again for the people in the back. Obviously, it is not standard to have aircraft collide. Oh, okay. That's not standard. Cool. Thank you. I guess for some people who may have thought that this was a standard thing that happens all the time, that sometimes helicopters crash into planes over, Washington, D.C., maybe this clears things up for them. I don't know. Again, we're talking about a former lobbyist / reality TV star here. So looking forward to how he tackles these difficult questions. We also had here from Kyle Kalinske, Secular Talk, pointing out this article here from, I believe, from the Daily Beast here. The headline is, FAA administrator quits on January 20th after Elon Musk told him to resign. And this is coming amidst Trump, as well as Elon, as well as this Doge administration, or the entirety of the Trump administration, essentially trying to push for federal workers to resign en masse, essentially, is their goal right now. They're offering them buyouts and we'll pay you for a few months or whatever the case may be. Essentially, the goal is slash and burn every single U.S. federal agency that we possibly can. That's the goal right now of Trump, of Elon, of his entire administration. So we didn't have an FAA administrator. And I guess in the last day or so, Trump appointed an acting FAA administrator. But, you know, again, just a little bit of an insight there. And then we also have this here to finish off. January 22nd, so literally just 8 days ago at this point, we had this article here from the Huffington Post. Trump guts key aviation safety committee, fires the head of the TSA, as well as the Coast Guard. So they say that the committee will technically continue to exist, but it won't have any members to carry out the work of examining safety issues at airlines and airports. So again, guys, we've had a number of different issues in regards to airlines that we've covered on this channel over the last number of months when it comes to Boeing, when it comes to many different close calls that have happened in this country. This one wasn't a close call, okay? This one actually happened. But if you look back at the warning signs, this was sort of inevitable. It was a matter of when, not if, this kind of a tragedy would happen. And the way that you prevent that from happening again in the future is you make sure that the regulations are in place, right? You make sure that people are paid enough. You make sure that you have enough people employed to do the necessary jobs to keep people safe. Instead of doing any of those things, Trump is doing the opposite. He wants to gut these federal agencies. He wants to give corporations free rein to do whatever, whenever, however they want. And he wants to serve the billionaire class as much as he can possibly get away with at the expense of the entirety of the country, at the expense of the safety. In this specific case with the FAA, but in many other circumstances as well. This is what his administration represents. So moving forward, you know, as Trump says, oh, we're going to tackle this. We're going to make sure there's an investigation. We're going to figure out a way to make sure this never happens again. Let's keep in mind who he is, right? He's not increasing regulations. He's not increasing safety standards. He's not breaking up monopolies. He's not going after corporate power. He's not going after the elites or the establishment or whatever else you want to sell yourself on. He is doing their bidding, okay? And so I highly doubt, I'm highly skeptical that he's going to figure out a way to address the systemic issues that led to something like this happening in the first place.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying